Former Galveston Mayor and Democratic candidate for Texas Attorney General Joe Jaworski. Thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Thank you so much, Jack. Good to be back.
Good to see you. So you landed in the runoff against Nathan Johnson, state senator, and I'm wondering, what is your plan to win on May 26th?
Well, step one, get in the runoff. We did that, check. And now we have a much more intentional electorate. So I think this favors me as the only certified progressive in this race. And, you know, that is Progress Texas saying that. Michelle Davis of Lone Star Left and other progressives, Houston Progressive Caucus, the Young Dems all throughout the state, you know, U-Dems at University of Texas, Austin Young Dems appeared before them Monday, the Texas Young Democrats. I am their candidate, and I think that when you have 53 club endorsements and over 140 individual endorsements, Jack, that's going to have the effect we want in a runoff. It was washed out a little bit on the March 3rd election, but this is going to be much more a family affair, a close electorate, an intentional electorate, and I think that favors Jaworski for Attorney General.
Why do you think that's so important that you are a progressive, and is that the main contrast between you and Johnson?
That is one of two main contrasts, the other being that I am an attorney with a record that he can't touch. And what I mean by that is in court, in appeals, and in just the sheer number of conflicts resolved. But going back to the progressive, that's what the Democrats want right now. The idea, this debate that, well, we just need to be in the middle of the road, that's been resolved, Jack. Now what we need is an attorney general with true Democratic bona fides, like Bobby Kennedy back in the day, who made it very clear that government should be to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Right now we've had an attorney general who has persecuted the vulnerable in Texas. And it's been going on for too long. And what we need is an attorney for 32 million Texans who will actually make their lives better.
So before I ask you about your priorities, I wanted to ask you about Tony Box was the third candidate in the race, and he told me he's staying neutral. He's not making any endorsements in this race. So how are you trying to court his supporters?
Well, I respect Tony Box. We became friends on the campaign trail, and we've been in touch. And he explained to me that he wanted to remain neutral, and I respect that. What Box and I both represented, Jack, we are attorneys first, not from the world of politics. When you look at Mr. Johnson and really Mays Middleton and Chip Roy, they all come from bodies, Senate, chambers, House of Representatives, where deals are cut every day, and people are having to compromise and sacrifice the vulnerable, like Senator Johnson has done several times in the most recent 89th legislative session. Tony Box and I represent what's good about being lawyers, and that's what we need more of now in the Attorney General's office. What I'm doing to recruit his support, which when you combine it with mine, outnumbered Nathan Johnson's support on March 3rd, is to be the best progressive candidate, featuring the fact that as an attorney, I have stood for the vulnerable and I have represented them successfully, like in Galveston when I sued the University of Texas system and the Rick Perry millionaire regents who tried to shut down University of Texas Medical Branch. I sued, I won that case, and I saved those jobs and the institution. So it's examples like that that I think Mr. Box and I both represent.
You just talked a little bit about, vote margins, et cetera, on March 3rd. I mean, Johnson almost won outright. I mean, he came very close. He had 48%. So does that put you at a disadvantage at all, realizing the fact that it's a brand new election?
No, it doesn't, and it is a brand new election. I had 533,000 votes, and I would like to think that those were all intentional votes. Mr. Johnson got his million votes, and he'll do the best he can to turn that number into something that is a majority in this two-way race. But it's a whole new race. I don't have any concern. He'll do his job, I'll do mine, but I will put my team up against his any day of the week.
And I did want to ask you about your priorities. What top 2 or 3 do you have if you are elected?
Okay, Jack, I am ready for that. You know, I'd like to see 3 new transformative divisions, never seen before in the Office of Attorney General. The first would be the division of affordability and value, related concepts. We hear a lot about affordability because everything costs too much and no one's doing anything for the hard-working families. But value also matters. That touches on consumer protection. So imagine 100 lawyers or more working every day on every possible topic, appearing before the Public Utility Commission to keep Encore from jacking our rates up repeatedly. It never seems to go down, does it? Appearing before the Texas Department of Insurance, holding property and health insurers accountable. You know, we have lemon laws and people buy a lot of used cars in Texas. Jack, you can never get a private lawyer to help you when you're getting screwed by a used car lot. But imagine equity of scale where the Attorney General makes sure those kinds of consumer laws are enforced and respected. So affordability and value will be something that my new division uses lawyers every day, uses the law to make affording the American dream attainable again. Here's another one, the division of elections and voter encouragement. The exact opposite of what we have now, which is voter suppression. Here's one metric that I look forward to measuring and showing Republican, Democratic, independent voters what we did. There's actually a law on the books. It's been on the books since 1985. A Dallas legislator passed it. And it's Texas Election Code 13.046D as in David, which requires every principal in a high school to offer registration twice a year to the senior class. Well, that's public and private schools. It's just simply not done. I think anecdotally 30% of all schools actually follow through with this. The spirit of the law is that all our 18-year-olders graduate from high school ready to vote, ready to exercise the American franchise. Well, here's my promise, Jack. There's 500,000 high school students every May that graduate from all the high schools in Texas. Over a 4-year term, 2 million young Americans registered to vote. That's something we can measure. And then,
so you would enforce that state law?
Absolutely, and it would be a letter within the week of my taking the oath of office. Hey, dear principal, congratulations on the beginning of spring semester. As you are aware, the Texas Election Code requires you to offer registration twice a year to the 18-year-olds in your senior class. Please let us know within the next 10 school days your plans for registering in the spring semester, and we'll be there to support you. Well, here's my third division, the division of ethics and integrity. Now, Jack, that's got a great acronym, DEI, but what it's going to do is hold Dan Patrick, Greg Abbott, and any other powerful politician who plays games with our ethics laws. How is it that Dan Patrick received $3 million from Tim Dunn, Ken Paxton's historically #1 donor, 6 weeks before calling the first witness at Paxton's impeachment trial? I mean, Patrick was the judge. You don't bribe the judge in Texas.
Well, would you need a new state law passed?
No, there's something called civil investigative demands. I think the voters are entitled to find out what the terms are of the $2 million forgivable loan. You know, what were the terms? And what emails might there be? There's no privilege between donor and recipient. The ethics laws and the laws, the criminal laws, if necessary. Look, I'm not saying I know the answer to that question, but no one does because it's never been investigated. I'm not casting aspersions unnecessarily in this interview. I'm just saying everybody knows Texas government is often bought and sold before the voter even gets a chance to speak. But we shouldn't be putting the public commons up for sale like someone going into the store to buy a loaf of bread. These matters are way too important, and there needs to be complete transparency. Everything needs to be above reproach. The Texas Attorney General ought to be the police officer on that, but Ken Paxton has been the exact opposite. My division of ethics and integrity will settle the score once and for all.
So you'll go after higher-ups, elected officials, et cetera?
Of either party. I mean, that's the only way you can do this, is to try and be nonpartisan about it. If someone is taking money from somebody and with the understanding that there be a delivery of a certain service or a certain outcome, that needs to be investigated.
But if there's no law against it, how do you, where do your teeth come from?
Well, I think there are laws. I think there's an understanding, whether you look at criminal statutes or ethics statutes, that there cannot be quid pro quo in Texas. And again, the very fact that we have to have this conversation, which we should, indicates that there's nobody watching the pen. The fox is guarding the hen house. Who is there in government to say, hey, that's improper, don't do it?
So let me ask you, just to follow up, because you're talking about 3 new divisions within the Attorney General's office. There are about, what, 4,000 employees. Are you talking about bulking up and adding, or are you talking about taking the 4,000 that you have and redistributing? Because if not, you're going to have to go to the legislature and ask them for more funding.
Yeah, no, this is going to be like Apollo 13. We've got what we've got. We're going to make do with the materials that are thrown on the desk. You remember that scene? Well, what I'd say to you is this. This is no time to ask for more money. I think rearranging what the resources we have, the very rich $1 billion every biennium budget, ought to be plenty to do the job right. I think we need to also focus on the staples of the Attorney General's office: collecting and distributing child support, Texas Public Information Act, public securities, Attorney General opinion. I mean, all these things have to be done by the Constitution and statute. I'm not suggesting that there be a bulking, because I don't think that's where the legislature is. I think all that money that they've sucked away on their pet projects needs to go back into public education, to broach another topic.
Is that something that the Attorney General, if you're Attorney General, you would take up, or is that really left to the legislature?
Absolutely left to the legislature, but the Attorney General can get involved in litigation and certainly advocacy.
Well, what does that mean exactly?
Well, that may mean suing, depending on who's in charge of the chambers in 2027, to undo the voucher program, which I don't think is constitutional, Jack.
Okay, so just to make sure that I hear you straight, you're talking about if you're elected as Attorney General in November, you come into office in January 2027, and if there's still a Republican majority legislature, governor, lieutenant governor,
That's right.
speaker, et cetera, you're talking about potentially filing a lawsuit suing the state of Texas for passing that law.
Suing
the school choice program, standing it up, et cetera.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the Texas Constitution, it's very clear that the legislature shall make suitable provision for an efficient system of free public education. And defunding public education, taking your and my tax dollars and saying you can use this in a private school, is unconstitutional.
And obviously we're Republicans, because we've asked Republicans about what Democrats have said, which is they're not funding public education enough, not keeping up with inflation, et cetera. And the Republicans say we just added $8.5 billion of new money to public schools last time, gave teachers public raises. So what do you say to that?
Well, 1 pint of blood for someone who's been bleeding for years isn't enough. It's a remarkable amount of money, but that just goes to show how many people live here in Texas. They need to do so much more than what they've done.
When Governor Abbott was Attorney General, he said that he would wake up, go to the office, sue the Obama administration, and then go home every day. And I'm wondering, would you do that with the Trump administration? Would you be filing lawsuits against the Trump administration, realizing the fact that he'll have 2 years left if you're elected to get into office?
Well, look, I thought the Obama administration was a very responsible, adult-like government. What's happening in the Trump administration is a debacle, and it will be recorded as one of the worst administrations in American history. I don't want it to hurt Texas any more than it has. To the extent I have to sue and get involved in litigation to stanch the bleeding of what the Trump administration is doing, I will. But there's so much good work to be done in Texas. That's what we'll be focusing on. But what's happening in the Trump White House right now is a real shame, and I think everyone is seeing it for what it is. The president himself is not doing well at all.
If a Democrat gets into the White House next time around in 2029, right, after being elected in 2028, could you see yourself, if you're Attorney General, suing a Democratic administration?
If it hurts Texas, absolutely. You know, again, we have become very partisan in our thinking, and really, right now, that's appropriate because the Republicans have completely genuflected to the Trump White House. I've never seen anything like it in my life, and it's a real shame. I'm looking for Republican leadership who will stand up to the corruption in the Trump administration, the outright emoluments violations. I mean, Mr. Trump is just making personal wealth off being the president. No one seems to step up from the Republican Party to call it out. So it's a completely partisan environment. But what I would say is, if a Democratic president had done something like that, you'd have to call it out as well, just like I said on the question of corruption in the state of Texas. But I think everyone is looking forward to the 2026 midterms, Jack, where there will be some balance restored to the three units of government. And I'd like to see at least the House, the United States House, fall in Democrats' hands so that there can be some investigations and potentially articles of impeachment, which I think is a sound response right now to what Mr. Trump's doing.
How would you defend a state law in court that you disagree with?
Right. So there is something called the Chinese Wall in Texas legal parlance. If I believe in my discretion as an attorney, and this is in the Texas disciplinary rules of professional conduct, Jack, if you believe something is a frivolous position, then, I mean, you've got a duty not to take that position in court. So I might, as Attorney General, say, I do not stand for this and I will be taking a contrary position. However, there's a lot of lawyers in the office of Attorney General, and there could be an occasion where one of my staff represent, as the statutes require, the state. But there may also be a separate ancillary proceeding that I pursue as the Attorney General on behalf of 32 million Texans who are my client on something like vouchers, where I've already said I believe it is unconstitutional what they've done. Now, the legislature may say, look, we'll get our own lawyer if Jaworski's not going to do it. But you can see that there is a way to supply the representation even if I don't believe it's proper.
I was just going to say, you use that. They would have to, the agencies or the governor or legislature would have to use outside counsel.
If they didn't want to use the supplemental assistant attorney generals that I would provide them.
Okay.
I mean, look.
You're saying your office would still do that, provide somebody. I mean, you're not going to go argue every case, obviously.
No.
But you're saying somebody from the office will still defend the state?
I'll make that offer because we have, lots of talent. And look, it's almost like a court-appointed attorney. The statutes require the Office of Attorney General to provide a representation. We've seen, not that I'm going to emulate Ken Paxton, but we've seen time and again him just refusing to defend, for example, the Texas Ethics Commission when Michael Quinn Sullivan sued them, right? He refuses to defend universities when certain professors have sued over their rights. Oh, how about this one? When Pam Bondi sued to destroy the Texas DREAM Act, sound educational policy for over 20 years that Mays Middleton, even in the 89th legislature, once again failed to terminate because the bipartisan will was to continue that educational policy.
In-state tuition for dreamers.
Correct, yes, sir. And Ken Paxton didn't just not defend the case, he actually said, where do I sign on? and it was a consent agreement before federal Judge Reed O'Connor. I mean, there wasn't even a controversy. He just said, I agree. He didn't give the legislature a chance to even weigh in. And then when students found out that their tuition agreements with their education institutions were no longer valid, and they tried to intervene to protect their rights, the judge said, no, this has been decided. Now they're all trying to intervene in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans. So Ken Paxton has set a horrible precedent, but what he should have done is made it clear that he didn't agree with it, if that's his feeling, and then provide alternative counsel within his office.
Last question, and that is, if you win the nomination on May 26th, how are you going to beat either of the Republicans, whether it's Senator Middleton or whether it's Congressman Roy?
Well, let me go on the record and say I think Mays Middleton will be the nominee. I mean, that's how I feel about it, based on what I've seen. How I'm going to deal with them. Go back in history, Jack, to the end of the Red Scare, when Joe McCarthy finally got handed his papers. We'd all have to remind ourselves who the Army litigator was that finally confronted McCarthy by saying, after all, sir, have you no shame, or something to that effect. What I see from Middleton and Roy is a hate campaign against Muslims, bringing up these problems that don't really exist on a grand scale, if at all, men going into girls' bathrooms. And then, of course, the old favorite, the old standby, the illegal alien, which, is outrageous, the idea that we are beset upon by this alien mass. Look, America and Texas understand there's a big difference between two storied institutions, criminal justice and immigration. And we don't need hate mongers in the constitutional office of Attorney General. So the way I'll beat them is to harshly, witheringly criticize their positions as out there and not mainstream at all. People are tired of this hate, and what they want is an Attorney General that actually represents people on questions of affordability and value. Reminds our youth that voting is a good thing. It's how everything's ever been done in America. And they want someone not on the take from the billionaires, or in Middleton's situation, a member of the millionaire-billionaire class himself. They just want an attorney like they would get in a private matter who cares deeply about the mission.
Former Galveston Mayor and Democratic candidate for Texas Attorney General, Joe Jaworski. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack.
We appreciate it.